Poetic Punch, a reflection for the 6th Sunday in Ordinary Time. The first reading on this 6th Sunday comes from the book of Sirach. Throughout the 6 verses, chapter 15, verses 15 through 20, we find parallelism, the same poetic structure that we observe in the Psalms. In parallelism, thought rhyme from line to line and verse to verse reinforces and deepens the meaning, which in this case concerns free will and its consequences. Verse 15 contains 2 parallel lines. If you choose, you can keep the commandments. They will save you. If you trust God, you too shall live. Obviously, they will save you and you too shall live line up easily. So the first phrase in each line should relate as well. Thus, choosing to keep the commandments and trusting in God align as 2 ways of describing the path to salvation, one building on the other. Choosing implies an act of free will. Trusting speaks of turning over that will to God. The 2 phrases together put obedience in the context of relationship. Verses 16 and 17 represent a more complex example of parallelism. He has set before you fire and water. To whichever you choose, stretch forth your hand. Before man are life and death, good and evil. Whichever he chooses shall be given him. The phrase fire and water, or reversed, water and fire, corresponds to life and death and good and evil. That leaves, to whichever you choose, stretch forth your hand, aligning with whichever he chooses shall be given him. Put simply, human beings make choices, and those choices have serious consequences. Verses 18 and 19 mix it up a bit. Immense is the wisdom of God. He is mighty in power and all-seeing. The eyes of God are on those who fear him. He understands man's every deed. Here, God's immense wisdom finds its echo in his understanding of every human action. God's ability to see all things gets personal as he keeps a close watch on those who fear him. Here, fear implies relationship. Surely awe and reverence toward God, but also reliance, trust in the one who keeps watch. Finally, the punchline comes in verse 20. No one does he command to act unjustly. To none does he give license to sin. Here, command and give license correspond, as do unjust action and sin. No one can claim God's authority or even God's permission to practice injustice. This hits home in our world, how often we humans make a habit of injustice, condemning, excluding, rejecting, and persecuting one another in the name of God and God's law. Pope Francis considers the consequences of this kind of behavior for evangelization in his exhortation, The Joy of the Gospel. It always pains me greatly how some Christian communities, and even consecrated persons, can tolerate different forms of enmity, division, calumny, defamation, vendetta, jealousy, and the desire to impose certain ideas at all costs, even to persecutions, which appear as veritable witch hunts. Whom are we going to evangelize if this is the way we act? He calls instead for the luminous and attractive witness of authentically fraternal and reconciled communities, in which love and care, forgiveness and reconciliation displace worldly practices. Jesus uses a different kind of repetitive pattern, namely, "You have heard, but I say to you," to bring out the spirit of the law of Moses and admonish his followers to do justice in their relationships with one another, not merely follow rules.